State Representative Thad Altman has represented Brevard County in the state legislature for 15 years. He's running for re-election on November 6th to represent District 52, covering the south central areas of the county. Welcome to I Am Brevard. I'm Isadora Rangel. Representative Altman and I sat down to talk about Republican Party politics, the governor's race, and the Indian River Lagoon this week. Watch. Thad Altman, thank you for being on the show.
It's great to be here.
So you're running for re-election in House District 52.
Yes.
You've been in the legislature for 15 years, am I right?
Yes.
That district covers the Vieira area, Satellite Beach, South Central Brevard, for those who don't know. But let's start with the basic question. What's your case for being re-elected to District 52?
Well, I think what I bring most to the job is experience. I think we need experience. We need to have a variety of membership, new blood, but those have been around. And I've been around, and I think I can bring that experience to the legislature to be effective in representing the constituents of my area.
And before running for the legislature, you've also been in the Senate for 8 years almost. You were also a county commissioner, and you've been in Brevard for so long, pretty much your whole life, right? How has Brevard changed in these last decades?
My family moved to Brevard in '57. I was a year and a half old. It's changed dramatically. I mean, when my family moved here, that was probably around 30, 40, 45,000 people in the entire county. It was very wild and unspoiled. It was a paradise, a natural paradise. And we've obviously had 550,000 people move in since. We're over 600,000 people. A lot of the development patterns were not so well planned either, so we've lost a lot of that. That really made a huge impression on me, and I think it's actually what motivated me to run for office in the first place. Environmental preservation, growth management, quality of life. So that's been my political career, much of my political career fighting for those issues. And
you and I first met when I was in Tallahassee covering the legislature, and I've seen you introduce and support a lot of environmental bills. But let's talk about the lagoon, which you were just describing how much Brevard has grown, and that has put a lot of pressure on the lagoon. And that's an issue that, you know, locals like to blame the state, and the state oftentimes doesn't step in. But whose responsibility is to clean up the lagoon, and how do we achieve that? Because I think the public's perception is, you know, year after year, it's promises and nothing gets done. It's
everyone. Everyone has to be a part of cleaning up the lagoon. We have 60 years of growth patterns and runoff and pollution and shoreline alterations and septic tanks. You could just go on and on and on. There's so many different elements to this challenge that we have, and everybody needs to come to the table and be a part of the solution.
You feel the legislature has done enough? I remember, I think it was 2014, there was over $200 million that were allocated for the lagoon, but since then we haven't really seen anything going towards the lagoon. Has the state done enough for lagoon protection?
Absolutely not. I mean, the state's partially responsible. And that's over decades of lack of action. I mean, we haven't funded Florida forever in about 4 or 5 years. I've been an advocate for that. A very popular land acquisition program that's actually under litigation now because the people voted to implement an aggressive land acquisition program, and the legislature just hasn't acted. So no, we've weakened our growth management laws, we've underfunded our water management districts, we've cut our land acquisition programs, we've failed to act on stronger growth management patterns. I know Governor Bush even was pursuing stronger growth management in his last term of governorship. Legislature didn't act, so no, we haven't done what we need to do, and we need to do a lot more.
And you mentioned cuts to the water management district and cuts to Florida Forever. Most of those were done by Republicans, in particular since Rick Scott got in office. How do you have these conversations with your party? Has your party done enough while controlling the legislature to help these environmental causes?
No, we just have not. Well, that's why we have a problem, and we do more. And it's been, obviously, I'm only one of 120, and when you count the Senate, one of 160, a bicameral legislature. That's what motivates me to keep fighting. I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that we will turn this around and do what we need to do. A lot of the things that those who have been fighting for conservation predicted are now coming true. I can remember when I ran for re-election for the county commission in '88, and I did my announcement, and the headlines of Florida Today talked about the need to control growth. That growth was too rampant, that we were going to have negative effects like the lagoon. Well, that's happened, but it's a very difficult and challenging battle. We're fighting a lot of big special interests, a lot of financial interests that really don't care about the long-term effects. It's more the immediate return on profit. And that's been a personal battle I've fought since the early '80s.
And what are those special interests?
Well, land development. Obviously, the desire to develop land in a way that can have serious negative environmental impacts. That's not all developers. There's some beautiful, beautiful development that's taking place in our state. But we need to make sure that our regulations are such that we encourage development patterns that are consistent with the quality of life that we have here. And we can do that without being too obtrusive and bureaucratic and getting in the way of good quality growth. Of course, for a lot of the state and a lot of our areas, it's too late. I mean, we've already seen this incredible development. So what we must do is we must mitigate those impacts, and that's not going to be free. I mean, we all must pay our fair share. We all need to be a part of a solution to clean up the lagoon, get septic tanks out of the lagoon, retrofit our public sewer lines that are leaking, work on the stormwater, dredge out the muck that's been there, accumulated over 6 years. Just a lot to do.
And I know that a lot of growth management decisions are made at the local level, but I'll just ask you, if you could get a do-over, what would you change about the way Brevard has grown in the past decades? And Brevard is a county that wants to grow versus other counties in Florida, but what would you do differently?
Well, what I would do, of course, these are things that I stood for and fought for many years. Just getting the political support, and we've done a lot of good things. I can only imagine what would have happened if we had not done. For example, when I was on the county commission, we removed 20,000 units out of the South Beaches. 20,000 units, a city. We invoked height restrictions and breezeway and open space, and we passed the environmental lands program and bought thousands of acres of lands. So those have been, we created a stormwater utility program. We've done a lot of things that we need to continue to do more. I think if you look at the mistakes that have been made in the efforts that we tried to, the state tried to implement an urban sprawl task force recommendation of focusing development more on urban centers and urban cores and preserving the green belt between our urban centers. That probably was the biggest loss that we faced when that did not pass. That was Governor Bob Martinez who worked with the counties and in cities, and we had a recommendation from that organization to invoke urban sprawl rules. That hurt. Obviously, when we were not successful in implementing the Amendment 1 program that passed 72%, it's in the Florida Constitution. Yes, it was 2014, and that's now under litigation. That's hundreds and hundreds, over $1 billion worth of land acquisition.
And the sticking issue is that lawmakers have used a big chunk of that money to pay for routine operating expenses of environmental agencies, and environmental groups say that's not the purpose of Amendment 1. And that's been a battle that's started in the first year that the legislature allocated the money. But I want to ask you, we're talking so much about Florida Forever, which buys lands for conservation. It was signed into law by Governor Bush, and today is a program that is not as popular as it once was. Are you a different kind of Republican than most Republicans that we see today in terms of in being more quote unquote progressive on environmental issues. Is that a dying breed nowadays?
I don't think so. I'm a traditional Republican. I feel like Republicans historically have had a tremendous environmental legacy, some will argue even greater than the Democrats. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican. Under Nixon, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and many of the great environmental accomplishments took place under Nixon. But we've lost that in our party, but I think it's coming back. Our gubernatorial candidate, Ron DeSantis, has really ran. He won. I think he won the primary on his environmental advocacy. I think that, and Florida Forever is still popular. 72% of the people voted for that.
Not as popular among lawmakers, though. I think to clarify that.
Right, and the legislature thumbed its nose at the public. It was a horrible decision, and I've been vocal about that on the floor of the House and the Senate, and a lot of my fellow Republicans and Democrats in a bipartisan effort have worked very hard to undo that. And keep in mind, a Republican-led House and Senate passed one of the largest environmental pieces of legislation ever passed, $1 billion for Everglades restoration. I was the House sponsor. Rob Bradley was the Senate. Our Senator Negron, President Negron played a key role. That was a huge piece of environmental
And that builds a
legislation.
reservoir south of Lake Okeechobee to contain discharges which are causing algae blooms on the East Coast and the red tide on the West Coast, and that's an issue that's definitely playing out in the gubernatorial race. But I want to go back a little bit to politics. You endorsed Adam Putnam in the GOP primary in the governor's race. Ron DeSantis won by a 20-point margin, and you say you were a traditional Republican. Since 2016, we've seen the Republican Party change. Do you feel at times that it's not your party anymore? And how do you, as a traditional Republican, keep up with the change in your party?
Well, the change has only been probably in the last decade. Jeb Bush was a phenomenal governor, a great conservationist. He was a great manager. He was a conservative, strong conservative. He was fiscally conservative as well as socially. I think it's just this period of time, and a lot of the environmental programs went by the wayside during the recession that we had, about a decade ago, maybe a little more, and under the name of economic development. And a lot of us were fearful that we would throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I think to a certain degree that has happened, and I believe you're going to see, and we are seeing, a new awareness and new sensitivity to environmental causes. Again, the Everglades bill that passed in the last legislature, and you're seeing gubernatorial candidates on the House, on the Democrat and Republican level, fight for environmental causes. So you're seeing a shift, I believe.
How do you think Trump is going to play in the gubernatorial and Senate race? Does it help Republicans or does it harm them?
I don't know. I think that is a question that we will only know until after the election. We'll see. I hope he helps.
I know I've stopped trying to predict elections because every time I try to do that, I get it wrong. I think ever since 2016, I think everybody needs to go with an open mind. It's just, we've seen how polls can be wrong a lot of times, although we've seen that they have been able to predict races in the last 2 years. But I want to talk about the political polarization that we see mostly in Washington, and everybody's paying attention to that, especially with the Kavanaugh hearings. But in the legislature, in the last 15 years, has polarization gotten worse, in your opinion?
No, I don't think it has. I think there's a great deal of bipartisanship in Tallahassee. You know, when I served in the Senate, what a great collegial body that Florida Senate is. It's known nationally for being a body that transcends partisanship and petty politics. It's a great body. And in these last years in the legislature, we passed a huge bipartisan piece of legislation with the School Safety Act. I would have never thought that Democrats and Republicans would have come together to build a compromise. And many Republicans, including myself, have really been beat up in the primaries for supporting that, but it was the right thing to do, and it required the parties to come together. So I'm seeing a difference on a statewide level. I don't know, I can't speak for the national level. There appears to be a great deal of that type of partisanship. But you know, it's interesting. if you take time to watch C-SPAN, where you're watching live hearings of so many, I'm not talking about the Kavanaugh hearing, that's probably not a good example, but you watch these general committee meetings, and I was struck at how much cooperation and bipartisanship there still is in Congress. The media on both sides really sensationalize a lot of the controversy and hostility, but that's not good news when Republicans and Democrats get along, and that doesn't seem to filter up into the networks as much as the negativeness.
Yes, let's move on to the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act. You just brought it up. It addresses the Parkland shooting on Valentine's Day. It does a lot of things, but it creates a guardian program to arm school employees, increases restrictions on gun purchases, and allocates money for mental health and school security. What did you like and what did you dislike about this bill?
I voted for it, and there was very little that I disliked. I think it's a great package. I love the fact that we took a broad-based approach from the mental health counseling to the restrictions of people who are endangerment to society being able to own and access guns, to the armoring of the school. Probably the greatest thing that a lot of people don't talk about is this commission that's going to evaluate the effectiveness of the law and come and recommend changes or improvements. So those are parts of the bill that overall I think was a great piece of legislation. I'm a little bit concerned with the restriction that we put on 20-year-olds' ability to buy rifles, and I'm hoping maybe we can tweak that, maybe require some additional background checks, but if you know, we do have exceptions for law enforcement and military personnel, but that was the only part that troubled me a little bit, gave me some heartburn, but I felt the overall picture was broader than that, and we needed to pass that bill. Very rare on a bill of that size you agree with everything, and that was the one part that I had some concern with.
Oh, and the Guardian program has been probably the most controversial part of it, and I'm sure you've heard from a lot of constituents on both sides of the issue. Why do you think it's a good idea? Well,
we have guns in our schools. It's the bad guys that have the guns. It's the people who are going to wreak havoc and to kill people. We need to put guns in the hands of people who are protecting our children. I am completely shocked with the opposition of trying to bring individuals who are highly trained and capable, that in that worst case scenario, when it gets down to where all of everything else has failed, the ability, the need to protect those kids from a hostile and violent person. I am 100% for it. There's sort of an anti-gun sentiment behind that, but it's really not about the guns. It's about who has the guns. And we need to put guns in hands of people who have good intentions and who are capable of protecting the public.
So I had a former superintendent of schools, Desmond Blackburn, on the same show a few months ago, and he came out against the program. As an educator, he says that a lot of employees, they're dealing with so many things, and having a gun would basically prevent them from interacting with students because they have a gun, they can break up fights or anything. Did you look through that lens of adding another task to someone who's only getting over 100 hours of training?
Well, you know, I try to, in every decision I make, to look through the lens and be objective and see all points of view. I mean, I try to do that. We all, in some way, try. We're all fallible, we're all human, but I did in that case, and I just have a different point of view. I look through the lens of my wife, who teaches first grade. Every morning she gets up and she goes into a classroom, and we talk about what happens in that horrible situation when there's a lockdown and everyone's locked down in a room, and that person carrying a weapon is banging down the door and coming in, and she has absolutely nothing, no way to defend herself. She wants to be able to defend herself. I don't understand how we would deny a teacher the ability to defend themselves if they chose to want to do that. Now, my wife, I don't know if it'd be a gun. It might be bear mace. It might be a taser or something different, but some way to make it uncomfortable and difficult for that person just to come and just shoot all those wonderful kids. We need to provide some ability. For those teachers who have the ability and the desire and the capability, I think it will make our schools safer.
And most schools have opted out of the Guardian program and leaving $58 million that were allocated for it unused. Governor Scott has asked the legislature to use that money to hire more school resource officers. Would you support that if it comes up in the next legislative session?
You know, I want to hear from the commission. We appointed them for a reason. I would hope that they would look at those dollars and determine how they think it would be best spent. I'd want to look through that lens you're talking about, to consider all the options. So I want to wait and see what the commission comes up. That's one of the options, but I won't commit until we get there and have a chance to study what could be the best use. That's a lot of money, and it definitely should be spent back into school safety. I can say that much.
And going back to another environmental issue is the cancer-causing chemicals that were found in groundwater around Satellite Beach. They were used in firefighting foam at Patrick Air Force Base, and now there are people who believe there is a cancer cluster around Satellite Beach. You have asked the governor to start investigating to verify if there is a cancer cluster. Where does that stand? And my understanding is that verifying a cancer cluster can be very difficult. I mean, what can the state do to step up and help?
Well, the first thing we need to do is allocate the resources so we can evaluate the problem as fully as possible. The people have a right to know, and if we do find a problem, to do whatever is necessary with our federal partners to fix that. I know the Department of Health and the DP, we have asked the governor to allocate additional resources. I've heard, not directly but indirectly, that they have stepped it up and they're doing extensive work, and we hope to be hearing something from them soon about some additional data and work that's being done. It's probably something that will have come up during the legislature this year in terms of funding. In these particular cases, first and foremost is the science and the data and the ability to make the right decision. We don't want to overreact and do something that doesn't fix the problem or flags a problem that we think is there that may not be there. So I know the state's doing a good job. The city of Satellite Beach is doing a great job. I attended a meeting where I think Patrick Air Force Base had 4 personnel there. It was well attended. So you're seeing a lot of response and a lot of action on that issue.
And one of the things that came up in our reporting is that the federal government doesn't set limits for these chemicals. Some states do. Do you think Florida should look into doing that?
I don't know if we have enough data to determine whether we should or should not. You know, when you start setting safety levels of chemicals, that's a highly complex and scientific endeavor. And if we were to set those standards, it's going to take some time and probably some appropriation of resources to do it because we want to do it and do it right. I think ultimately standards need to be established by the federal EPA because they have the resources to do the studies and the analysis, and you get consistency across the country. You don't have a hodgepodge of regulations. But we do know states do that, and states do have different environments and different ecosystems and different climates. And if we determine after we've done the work that we've done that we need to take a look at that, then we will need to do it. But that's going to take time. That will be a very involved process. It requires rulemaking, and Florida law establishes procedures by which you do rules. It could possibly provide some legislative authority to be granted and some appropriation. So that's a possibility, but that's a long-term approach. I think short-term, we really need to test wells. I think we should support blood tests for individuals, and we need to do perhaps some type of ground monitoring, seismic monitoring, seeing what's under the ground, trying to find some of the debris that may be there from a dump.
And moving on to a completely unrelated topic, I remember a couple of years you were one of the people in the legislature who were pushing for the death penalty reform.
Right.
I believe there was a court case at the time saying that the Florida standard wasn't good. So you have been fiercely advocating to make sure that there's an unanimous decision of the jury.
Yes.
when there is a death penalty case. And you were the only Republican who voted against the bill that was passed in 2016 to reform the system. Can you explain your decision and a little bit about that bill?
Well, I try not to say I told you so, but I read the court's opinion, the reviews, and it was clear to me that we were just unconstitutional what we're attempting to do. The non-unanimous jury just created so many problems and violated so many basic legal and constitutional premises. I felt strongly that we needed to fix it, and the court agreed, and we now have. We had to, because our death penalty was ruled unconstitutional. But there's still problems with the death penalty. There's still problems with our criminal justice system. Criminal justice reform is something I've been very deeply involved with personally. We see a lot of misjustice, especially done to my youth offenders, which I've advocated, for example, for civil citation. First-time youth offenders, a non-violent offender, giving them a civil citation, require them to do community service, and not be treated as a hardened criminal and have a arrest record for their entire life. We have got to change the way that we administer justice in our society, because we're creating a counterculture of criminals where these are individuals that can be reached and can be headed in the right directions, especially the youthful offenders.
And we have less than 45 seconds left, but give me one of your biggest successes in the legislature and one of your biggest failures or things that you hope to still accomplish. 30 seconds.
I think my biggest success is when we passed the $1 billion cigarette tax. We were at one of the lowest taxes in this nation, and we were unable to adequately fund our Medicaid and Medicare budget.
And what do you hope to accomplish?
Additional dollars for the Indian River Lagoon, and some legislation that helps promote the aerospace industry.
Representative Altman, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Okay, thank you.
That's Eye on Brevard for today. Go to Florida Today's YouTube channel to rewatch all of our episodes, and thanks for watching.